Hi, this is Tammy Leisher, host of Embracing Change, Talking Through Trauma. The podcast is focused on fitness enthusiasts and movement educators, where we'll have deep conversations that are impacting the movement industry. For example, trauma, health, vitality, the nervous system, and movement. And now, welcome. Good day. Welcome to Embracing Change, Talking Through Trauma. And today, my guest is Sofia Engelman. And Sofia is a Brooklyn-based Pilates teacher, as well as a dance artist, an educator, and a writer specializing in gender-affirming Pilates for queer and trans folks. Her business name is Queer Body Pilates, and we are here to have a conversation about her work that she's doing. And welcome, Sofia. Guys, thank you for being here with me today.
Yeah, thanks, Tammy.
So can you tell our listeners a little bit about what brought you to the work that you're doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came to Pilates as a way to heal after a pretty major emergency surgery that I had, and I found that I was able to really kind of take the lead in my own rehab and healing after the surgery through Pilates. And my background before that was largely in dance, and specifically in studying queer and trans history within like contemporary dance canon. And I felt that as I was doing my Pilates training, that so much of what I was being taught was meant to cater to an audience and a population that was not necessarily who I was interested in working with. And so I pretty quickly started applying my sort of knowledge of being a part of the queer and trans community and those community needs to what I was learning in my training program. And so when I finished my certification, I started focusing on working with queer and trans populations really right away. And I think that a lot of the sort of rehab and healing work that I sort of experienced from my own surgery recovery really led me to specifically working with folks who were sort of in prehab and rehab stages for gender affirming surgeries. So I have really enjoyed kind of applying that information to working with those populations and providing a kind of care that there's really a need for, and that medical professionals are not really speaking about to clients or supporting with.
Well, and I think that you're probably one of, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you're probably one of the only ones that are actually speaking about this, like outwardly speaking about it. Am I correct or wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel myself in community with like queer and trans care workers working in massage and herbalism and yoga and a variety of other somatic forms. But
Mhm.
I'm not aware of many other folks in the Pilates industry doing this kind of work. I do know there are quite a lot of Pilates professionals whose identities overlap with mine, and they're interested in working with those communities. But ultimately, that might not be like the stated kind of primary focus of the work that they do. So yeah, I've largely looked beyond the Pilates community to sort of look toward practitioners who are leading the way in this kind of community-centered work with LGBTQ plus folks.
Yeah. I think it's very much needed, very much needed. So, um, when we had our conversation a few weeks ago, you made a statement that I thought was really pretty profound, and I would like to start with that. When you talked about how this community is anti-trauma informed. And I wanted to know why you said that.
Yeah, I think I was referring to my experience of kind of mainstream Pilates culture,
Mhm.
um, and these kind of like rampant practices of non-consensual touch, of
Yes.
prioritizing and idealizing, um, and kind of encouraging movers to push through their own physical and mental boundaries. Um, and yeah, and sort of feeling also like there's just a lot of language that maybe not purposely, but states to folks who is welcome in the space. There's a lot of ways that cis women, so women who still identify and align with the sex that they were assigned at birth, um, how like a perception of um like that identity of cis women being who like all Pilates is geared toward, and
Yeah.
assumptions in language around who's in the space that therefore makes folks that may not align with that identity automatically feel othered.
Yeah. And when you talked a little bit just a minute ago about the medical community, and I think that there's when you're talking about being trauma informed, and I just want to read just a small snippet on the definition, and this actually comes from um, uh, Erica Hornthal, and she wrote a book called Body Aware. And so this is something that she's written. And trauma informed means operating in a lens that is sensitive to the fact that anyone may have experienced trauma that is, and it isn't one size fits all. Trauma manifests differently in everyone. While there's commodities, it's important to treat each person as an individual with their own unique lived experiences. Trauma is more than what happened to you or what is wrong with you. A trauma informed approach provides compassionate, gentle, curious perspective on how our behaviors can be manifested in our past experiences. It invites curiosity, exploration, and seeking to minimize shame and guilt that often accompanies trauma survivors. But it's also, I'm just going to say that it allows us to create environments that are safe, that can allow people to be who they are individually without judgment, without criticism, and it's just allowing them to be who they are. So, because obviously, my work is trauma informed through trauma informed movement, and I just felt that that was really something that is important to talk about because we don't know what people are coming to us with. So,
Yeah,
just
absolutely. And I think sort of maybe another thing I was thinking about when I was saying that a lot of Pilates is sort of like almost feels like consciously anti-trauma informed, is that there's maybe sometimes a stated and sometimes an unstated goal toward like uniformity
yeah,
of the bodies in the space, and like a refusal to make space for difference. And I think those like really tight boxes end up leaving so many people out, for
well,
just a huge range of reasons. Yeah.
and I think that when people come to us, and if they are or have been informed, or let's just say they've experienced trauma, it's going to show up in their bodies in so many different ways. And
Yeah.
learning how to cue differently to, versus touch versus not touch, or permission, or just allowing people to breathe their normal pace to start with, especially if they're just coming to us. And could you talk a little bit about like touch and this is in parts of, or lack of touch versus not, excuse me, yeah, touch or cueing, hands-on cueing versus not hands-on cueing. Uh, and I just think it's important for us to have a discussion around that.
For sure. Um, I think that often training programs sort of send this message to teachers that touch is part of what people are paying for, and touch is like a necessary part of the learning practice. And I think this sort of notion has been upheld for so long because often the people who end up being Pilates teachers are folks that are really deeply embodied and therefore maybe a little bit more likely to like crave and respond to and learn from touch. But that's not the case for all of our clients. Like everyone has different learning styles. I really think about consent as an ongoing process. So I understand that people are going to feel comfortable with different things on different days. And so it's a conversation at the beginning of every session. That doesn't mean we're talking for 5 minutes about it necessarily. You know, sometimes I know people really well and it's just a quick 1 sentence check-in, but having that moment is so important. And when people do give me just like a all around like big yes, go ahead for touch, I'm still never going to do that without telling them what I'm doing. I think this is like a big part of just like de-escalation, is just for people to feel really comfortable and like understanding of what's happening in the space. So even if I'm moving my spatial or like proximal relationship to a client, I usually tell them, like, I'll say, okay, you're going to keep going. I'm going to come around behind you. And I'm going to place my hand onto your shoulder. So I'm telling them exactly what to expect. So even if they've already given a yes to all touch, I'm still informing them as we go, so that they never have to worry about something unknown happening. They know what's going on. And by me naming it, that also means that it's already part of a conversation. And that makes so much more space for someone to say, you know what, at the beginning of the session, I thought I was okay with anything today, or I totally thought I was good with you touching my shoulders, but it's actually no longer the case. So I'm keeping it constantly something I'm being transparent about. And that allows them to feel maybe a bit more empowered to be transparent about their own needs as well.
Well, and I think too, it's really, I also cue, um, I always ask. There's never like, I always ask consent before every session. I don't care how many times they've been coming to me. And I've had people say to me, you don't have to ask me anymore. I'm like, well, yeah, you do. I just have to. But I feel like, you know, I'm gonna blanket that and say, you know, we think of we're creating environments that are safe for everybody. And I just want to say that it's really about the safety of the person from the inside out. That's really important because, you know, I can tell you that as long as I've been doing this work, there still have been times that people have said to me, I'm not comfortable with you doing blah, blah, blah. And it was taken, obviously, I was very grateful that the person felt comfortable to talk to me about the situation, but it also was very much reinforced the whole thing about like the environment and how it comes from the inside out with the people. And we can provide, you know, nice gray walls and we can provide lighting and we can do all these things. But if the people are coming to us that are not comfortable, it's going to come out in their behavior in so many
Absolutely.
different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our priority, right, is people's long-term well-being, and the movement practices that we're doing with them are not going to be sustainable for the long term if they don't actually feel safe with you. So
Exactly.
that comes above all else. We have to really think about where our priorities are. And that is so much, that is, I think there's so many ways that verbally, for example, or through offering methods for self-touch that we can help someone figure out how to say, like, stabilize their pelvis. But
Yes.
what's more important is that they feel comfortable. And so if, like, you're doing all these different things and they're still having trouble stabilizing their pelvis, I care more about them feeling comfortable than me putting my hands on there and making their pelvis stay still. So, like, that's like a moment where you say, okay, we're going to let that go. We'll keep returning toward it. We'll figure things out, but I'm never going to, like, nothing's ever more important than their comfort.
Yeah. And I think that that's where, like, the sense of trust, like they're coming to us, and trust takes so much time. And I mean, I realize we in like Pilates trainings, and these kind of conversations never come up in Pilates trainings. And that's why having a voice and having people that would be willing to be guests on my podcast to have a voice to say, you know what, this is what we need to talk about. And
Yeah.
it's and conversations like this need to be had and so many different levels. So, would you, um, I'm sorry, I had my phone and I touched it and it scrolled on me. Um, so the important, because we talked just a little bit about the importance of the language and
Mhm.
cueing, from a touch standpoint, but I oftentimes use language as a way for them to do self-correcting themselves, not necessarily me touching them. How
Yeah.
about you?
Absolutely. I work with a lot of clients who have gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is like any kind of, like, mental, emotional uneasiness that is triggered um, by feeling like one's body isn't aligned with their actual gender identity. And so specifically, I work a lot with folks who have gender dysphoria around their chest or their pelvis or hips, because these are parts of the body that are, like, quite sexualized, and can trigger a lot of these feelings around, like, a lack of alignment between one's gender identity and their assigned sex. And I really focus on finding language to cue toward those areas of the body without someone having to actually focus or think about those parts of the body too much. So, like, very, like, relational external cueing, and also cueing toward, like, the posterior surface of the body. So often, instead of talking about someone's hips, will talk a lot about, like, stabilization of, like, the back pockets of their pants, for example. And this is a way to get across these same ideas around stability in the hips, without ever having to say the word hip. Because I have people where not just touch to the hips is triggering, but even the word brings up all of these cultural associations that might be a trigger. Yeah, so I talk a lot about the back pockets. I work a lot on, yeah, like, sensory cueing into posterior surface, also into the sits bones, and then finding directionality and, like, an energetic reach through the seat. Um, and with the chest, I never say breaths, regardless of who the client is. Um, and we'll work a lot on thinking about like where the heart space is looking and feeling really three-dimensional about like both where the heart and the spine are looking and how that relates to different things in the room. And maybe like, oh, imagining the blinds, or sorry, the ribs as like blinds that you're opening and closing, like blinds on a window. So just finding like imagery and ways of relating to this space so that we can still practice thoracic mobility and pelvic stability and mobility in an intentional way without me ever having to touch those areas, without them having to touch those areas, and without those words necessarily even getting thrown into the space. So people can still have like a really fruitful practice where we're doing these very Pilates things of focusing on those areas of the body and strengthening them, while also taking language that might be a trigger out of the equation, and definitely taking touch out of the equation.
I love the cueing that I mean, because you could use back pockets for almost anybody, or
Yeah.
like I've never heard the term like the blinds, like you like associating the ribs, like the blinds opening and closing. So those are new cues for me, but I really like the book I've used before, but it's been a long time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And then the other thing that I want to talk about is how do you hold space for people in your practice?
Yeah. I mean, I really feel that this starts with like the client intake process. And I think that, you know, some people really like to express themselves through writing. Some people are best talking face to face, but giving people an opportunity through an intake form, first to understand what my values are. So expressing through my intake form what my stance on touch is and consent is, and asking about like sites of dysphoria that I should be mindful of, just starting the conversation there. It's putting my values forward, which is going to help people trust me and feel more comfortable with me. It also gives people an opportunity to start reflecting on their own comfortability with these things. Without the pressure of like being face to face with me, maybe around like crazy looking machinery that they've never used before. Because once they come into the space, as much as I'm trying to create a collaborative relationship, at the beginning, there's a little bit of a power dynamic no matter what I do, because I am teaching them how to use this equipment. And so I am like, I have some information they don't have. And so I need to be really mindful of that power dynamic. I think it's important to acknowledge. And by giving people the opportunity to express their needs in writing before they enter into this space where they might be intimidated is really, really key. And sometimes clients like don't have much to say in response to these questions that I ask, and that's fine. I just know that I've started the trust building process and that we can keep checking in verbally now, but we've started something and I've expressed to them that I want them to be in charge and that I care about their needs.
Yeah. I like to use a term in trauma-informed movement is that um, trauma impacts our voice, our choice, and our agency. And I think it's so important. I always come back to giving choices and, allowing their voice to be heard and, not to, like you said, not today, like about the touch on the shoulder and things like that. It's just really important. And I think too, it's um, when you're working with clients that like just um like the holding space can sometimes allow people to reconnect with their bodies, that I think is just so empowering for them to be able to say, oh my gosh, today I was able to do, I don't know, leg circles or something, or feel different in leg circles, because I can tell you I work with a lot of women who've gone through sexual abuse, and putting legs in straps can be very intimidating. And I always give people the choice of how big their circles are going to be, and just holding space with them and standing away from the reformer instead of at the end of the reformer, standing to the side of the reformer, or giving them other options instead of doing leg circles, do, I don't know, just lowering and lifting.
For
Um,
sure. And I
yeah.
think also our like physical relationship to folks is really important, like even beyond touch, just being mindful of, like, for example, in leg circles, I think that's a great example with feet and straps, like just noticing, okay, if I was to stand up, like by the foot bar, looking down at this person, like toward their crotch, basically, like how is that going to make them feel? And so just thinking about where you're situating yourself when you're higher than them and when you're down at their level, and just like people often when they're new to a movement practice are going to be very, very conscious of what they look like. And so just trying to give like very, I'm feeling myself like rolling back in my rolly chair. I have this rolly chair that I use because I just like to get out of people's way as quickly as possible if I need to. But just like giving them, thinking about how they're going to perceive your gaze from
And
whatever standpoint you're
and
at, and how that might trigger feelings around power also.
yeah, I think that positioning, like how you said you have a rolly chair, I usually will sit like across from them or beside them, but bring myself down so I'm not towering over them. So I'm sitting more on a level that I would be like, on their level is
Yeah.
where I'm guessing I would say. And I think it's really important. Um, I think that like the power of holding space, but also the power of the pause and not continuously cueing,
Yeah.
and just allow people to be in their bodies, for me works really, really well. I don't over talk during sessions. I mean, especially when I'm first starting with people, I want them to feel what's going on, and within themselves. As
Yeah.
long as they're not hurting themselves, then I will be um, more. And then as the more they begin to work with me, then I begin to re-cue their alignment and how they're like, if they, again, if it's a safety factor, then obviously I'm going to say something. But I think that in the very beginning, because like you, I predominantly do one-on-ones. I have one duet right now, but that's not normal for me. Most everybody that I do work with is one-on-ones. I have a few very small classes. So,
Yeah.
because I saw you have, don't you have a new class that you've just started?
Yeah, I have two Zoom classes that I'm doing right now, and then 4 times a week I teach like a 8-person reformer class at a studio that's local to me. So I do that as well, but really kind of the absolute bulk of what I do um, is one-on-one. And I think like in response to this question of like how to build in more sort of specific asks of people in terms of alignment. Like,
Mhm.
I think, it's really an intuition practice. I like to kind of state things as like what ifs or just like invitations of like,
Yeah.
or maybe I'll state what I'm noticing and say, I'm curious if, you were to do this instead. And often I'll say like, for example, I keep coming back to this like example of pelvic stability, but like I might say, it's not bad for your pelvis to move. It's supposed to move. That's actually great. But in this specific exercise, our goal is to strengthen the muscles that stabilize our pelvis. And actually, the movement that you're doing of the leg, the range of motion isn't the goal there. The movement of the leg is there to challenge the pelvic stability. And so just
Mm.
really being clear about what the goal is and why I'm asking someone to do something or not do something so that they understand that like there isn't any like my ask around alignment is not going to incite any fear or timidity, hopefully. I'm really expressing exactly why I'm stating these possibilities so that we're on the same page. And then they have more information and agency,
Well,
and they're more likely to try it, honestly, because they're like, oh,
yeah,
I get why
yeah,
you're doing that. It's not just, you're not imposing like an aesthetic onto me.
yeah.
Like, this is
I
actually good.
Yeah, I think that the open-ended questions or the what if questions or the I'm curious about, those are all really they're very powerful questions around again giving people back their agency, their autonomy, self-efficacy, whatever words you want to use, and it's just so important. Um, and I think that it's we all have our I mean, every single one of us who teaches Pilates all has our own way of teaching. And I
Yeah.
think that when you step outside of the traditional, like, I'm just going to say, I mean, I don't know many other Pilates instructors that teach trauma informed, but I mean, you do to a certain extent already. But as far as like actually identify as teaching trauma informed, it's really been um, just allowing people to become reconnected to their bodies and feeling comfortable in it. And I think that that's where the goal of what you're trying to do is exactly trying to get people to reconnect with their bodies because they may have gone through, I don't know, medical trauma or humiliation or shame. I mean, there's a multitude of things but that's not my job to know. My job is to help them process it through their body. And I think that that's really important. So, Sophia, you've given us a lot of insight. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to our conversation today that I didn't bring up?
Hmm. I mean, I just think that this question around the language that we use is so important. And I think beyond cueing, there's language that happens in Pilates spaces, just like in casual conversations and check-ins. And I think it's just important to take into account that all language that's happening in a movement space um, is going to affect people's physical experience during the practice. Um, and so just being mindful around assumptions of clients' genders and pronouns and the gender of like their partners, just really trying to self-edit any assumptions, because even if all of your cueing is brilliant and makes someone feel comfortable, you can completely undermine all of that by misgendering them or assuming they're straight when they're not, or making a comment about what bathroom to use or like anything like this. Like there's just all of that stuff goes as much into how someone feels in a space as the cueing itself. So it's good to think about the cueing 100%. I think that's sort of like the nitty gritty, like interesting, deep stuff where we can really like hone our practices. And there's also this like more superficial languaging that happens too, that's important for us to think about so people feel comfortable in our businesses.
Yeah. The other thing I just want to say that I think is really important is for us as professionals to really look and examine our own biases and how we perceive people. I mean, and so on so many different levels. And I think that that is definitely not something that we always talk about, especially in Pilates trainings. And I think it's important from a business standpoint to have an understanding of how we perceive people as well, because that comes across in our body language 100%. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Sophia, you were recently on Fusion Pilates. Would you tell us a little bit about like I know it was a good experience because you and I've already said we've already talked a little bit about that, but um that's coming out in a few weeks, correct? And we
Yeah.
at this point we don't have a date.
Yeah, likely sometime this month in May. I recorded a workshop that's a little over 2 hours long. It's about queer and trans affirming Pilates. I speak in depth about intake processes, which I spoke about a little bit here, but I get a little bit more specific about the exact type of information I like to gather when I get a new client. I went in depth on how to cue the hips when someone has dysphoria in that area. So this is about language, but also a series of exercises that I find to be really useful um, to find intentional stability and mobility around the hips. And then I also did the same thing with the chest. And then I went through protocol for top surgery, prehab, and rehab. And top surgery is a gender affirming surgery for trans masculine folks, which removes breast tissue. And I break down all the different kinds of top surgery also and exercises that I like to do during prehab and rehab. So that'll be coming out sometime this month if people are interested in more information around language and some tools and exercises to really work specifically with the queer and trans community.
Sounds amazing, and I definitely will be watching it. So, um, thank you so much for being my guest today. Um, it was a delight. I think that um, it was a very enlightening conversation, and I hope most of our viewers will listen. Um, and I will tag if depends on when the fusion Pilates comes out, but I'm going to try and time it where we can put them together, so give you a little bit more exposure as well. So, but thank you so much, Sophia, and please stay on for just a minute. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. It's my lifelong mission to educate and bring awareness to the fitness industry around trauma-informed movement. If you have any questions or subject that you would like to hear addressed, reach out to me at my website at www.studiotpilates.com. Hit that subscribe button so the next time we release our latest episode, you're going to be notified. You can also reach out to me on Facebook at Tammy Leisure. On Instagram, you can also reach out to me at Tammy Leisure, but also Studio T Pilates MI. Thank you for listening to today's episode, and we'll talk to you next time.